There have been many financial crises in the history of humanity, from the Dutch tulip mania in the 1600s to the Great Depression to the housing market crash of 2008. But they've all had some things in common, and even though they happened in different countries and different times, they've all started out in the same way. In this video, we'll look at some of the indicators that can help predict a financial crisis that is coming, and more importantly, what actions can you take to ensure you're not affected by it as much. But to understand the factors and signals that inform us of an upcoming crash, let's first understand what really happened in the worst 3 financial crises in the past, starting with the Dutch tulip crisis of the 1600s. The Dutch had one of the most advanced economies in Europe, a global trade empire, and a wealthy middle class. And weirdly enough, to show off their status, tulips became the luxury item of choice. Tulips were scarce as they bloomed only once a year and supply was limited. You could only grow so many and then had to wait another year. And as more and more people were wanting them, they became an investment vehicle. People weren't buying them anymore to show their status, but in hopes of reselling them to turn a profit. And this is where the speculation and the craziness began. The tulips contracts were introduced. The tulip supply was so limited that people started making agreements to buy or sell tulips at a future date. And then people started buying and reselling these contracts without even touching a tulip themselves. From merchants to everyday workers, everyone jumped in. As a result, the prices of these contracts skyrocketed, until it all came crashing down when people realized that tulips aren't worth the amount of money the contracts are. The general confidence cracked, and the prices of these contracts collapsed, and the entire tulip market was finished in weeks. As a result, people were left with worthless contracts. Contracts for what they had spent their entire life savings for, and no one was willing to buy them now for pennies. This is what led to probably the first ever financial crisis. And although the overall Dutch economy survived, many individuals were financially ruined. Moving on to the Great Depression of 1929. The US in the 1920s was booming. The war was over, industries were growing, and a new consumer culture was taking shape. People had jobs, factories were expanding, and the stock market was reaching new highs almost every week. And with all this, people started believing that things will only get better and that the stock market is only going up from this point on. So more and more people started investing. First, they invested with all of their money and their savings. And when that ran out, people started taking out loans and then putting that into the stock market. In other words, they started margin trading. Margin trading is a practice where you put down a fraction of the cost and borrow the rest from a broker. So with just a few $100s, you can control thousands in stock. But the challenge with this is that if the stock prices go up, you make a fortune. But if they go down, you get into serious trouble. In 1929, people weren't buying stocks based on company performance. In fact, they were buying because they thought prices would only keep rising. From bankers to small-town shopkeepers, everyone joined in. Stock prices soared. Stocks of companies that were not doing too well also rose, and this is where few investors started pulling out because the numbers just didn't make sense. This led to a drop in confidence and panic to spread. People rushed to sell, and suddenly no one wanted to buy. The market crashed, and billions of dollars were wiped out in days. Banks collapsed, businesses shut down, unemployment soared. This was made worse as people not only poured their life savings into the stock market, but also took out big loans to gamble in the stock market expecting to win, just because of the speculation that prices will only go up. It was the worst economic downturn in modern history. Now let's talk about the housing crash of 2008. By now, you should be noticing a pattern. Simply put, people were buying homes they couldn't actually afford using money they were loaned with little to no background checks. Why? Because everyone believed home prices would just keep going up. Banks kept lending, and people kept jumping into the housing market thinking there was no way to lose. But when interest rates rose, mortgage payments skyrocketed. Homeowners started defaulting as they couldn't afford their mortgage payments, and suddenly the whole system came crashing down. House prices plummeted, and millions of Americans lost their homes. And the world was thrown into the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. And by now, the pattern should be clear. In each of these crises, from tulips to tech stocks to housing the trigger, wasn't just one bad decision. It was a collective belief among people that price of a certain asset could only go up. It didn't matter if it was tulips or stocks or houses. When people stop questioning value and start chasing hype, that's when things spiral out of control. So what can we learn from this? There are some warning signs that have shown up in nearly every major financial crash in history. Number 1. Easy access to credit. In both 1929 and 2008, people borrowed money they couldn't afford to lose. When banks and lenders lower their standards and money becomes too easy, financial bubbles form faster. Number 2. Disconnect between price and reality. When the price of an asset keeps climbing, even though the fundamentals haven't changed, it's likely overvalued. This happened with tulips, with dot-com stocks in the early 2000s, with cryptocurrency, and it'll happen again. So what can you do? Don't follow the hype blindly. Ask yourself questions like, why is this asset valuable? What's driving the price up? Avoid investing money you can't afford to lose, especially if you're borrowing it. And finally, don't put all your money into a single hot trend, no matter how good it looks on YouTube or Reddit. A recent example of this was people putting their money into meme coins or NFTs. We all saw how that went. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it often rhymes. And the earlier you can recognize those trends, the better your chances of staying safe or even coming out ahead. So the next time you hear someone say, don't miss out, it's only going up, you'll know to pause and look a little deeper, because every financial crisis starts the same way. If this video helped you see the pattern more clearly, consider giving it a like and subscribe for more content like this.